If a decorated Major General in full uniform can be cuffed like a criminal, what happens to the rest of us? You never think something small will flip your whole world upside down. Major General Elias Braxton sure didn't. He just needed a coffee. Nothing fancy, nothing special. Just a quick stop on a quiet Saturday morning before heading to a veterans event over in Rockford, Michigan. His uniform was spotless. Polished shoes, every button done up sharp, medals shining on his chest like a walking piece of history. He wasn't just anybody. He'd served in some of the hardest places on earth, carried the flag into places where most people wouldn't even dare visit. 2 tours in Afghanistan, Iraq, countless humanitarian missions. Yet here he was, back home, where everything was supposed to be safe and respected. He pulled his black SUV into a small lot outside a place called Dale's Coffee Spot, one of those family-owned diners you see in towns where everybody knows everybody. Elias adjusted his hat in the mirror, smiled at himself, and grabbed his wallet. Inside the cafe, it smelled like burnt toast and fresh cinnamon. A few heads turned as he walked in, but it wasn't the usual polite nods he was used to. It felt different, a little tighter, a little colder. He ignored it, walked up to the counter, ordered a black coffee to go, and thanked the teenage cashier who kept nervously glancing at his chest full of medals like she wasn't sure if they were real or Halloween decorations. Outside, the air was crisp. Elias took a deep breath, appreciating the simple things: the sun, the open road ahead, the small pleasures that made everything worth it. He unlocked his car with a soft beep and was about to slide into the driver's seat when he noticed something from the corner of his eye. 2 middle-aged women standing by a blue pickup truck, whispering, pointing, at him. Elias felt it, that invisible weight pressing down, but brushed it aside. Maybe they just weren't used to seeing a black man in uniform around here. Maybe they were curious. He wasn't here to judge. He had places to be, people to honor. But as he tossed his coffee into the cup holder and started the ignition, a police cruiser pulled into the lot. Then another, lights flashing, no sirens. His heart didn't race. He wasn't scared. He was used to pressure, used to scrutiny. But he sighed quietly, already knowing how this kind of story usually went. The 2 cruisers boxed him in neatly, front and back. 2 officers stepped out, one white, one Latino, hands on their belts, eyes locked onto him like he was a threat. Elias stayed seated. He kept his hands visible on the steering wheel, the same way he'd taught dozens of young black soldiers to do if they ever got pulled over. The Latino officer, taller, broader, looked over and muttered something to his partner. The white officer nodded, jaw tight, and started approaching. Elias rolled his window down halfway, calm, collected. "Good morning, officers. Something wrong?" The white officer squinted at him, almost like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "We got a call. Says someone's impersonating military personnel," he said, voice flat, suspicious. He jerked his chin at Elias's chest. "That getup real?" Elias blinked. "This getup is 22 years of service. Major General Elias Braxton, United States Army." He said it steady, respectful, but it didn't matter. The Latino officer moved closer now, one hand hovering too close to his taser. "We're gonna need to see some ID," the white cop barked. Elias nodded calmly. "No problem. Let me reach into my jacket." "Slowly," the officer warned, stepping even closer. Inside, Elias's heart tightened, not from fear. He'd survived firefights, but from a heavy kind of sadness. How was it that after fighting for this country, standing in front of Congress, leading troops into battle, he was standing here, treated like a common criminal for the crime of existing while black? He handed over his military ID, his driver's license, everything neat and official. The officers glanced at it, but didn't even really look. Their minds were already made up. The Latino cop stepped back, shaking his head slightly. "Could be fake," he muttered. The white cop gave a sharp nod. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." Elias didn't move for a second. "Officers, I'm telling you, contact the Pentagon. They'll confirm everything." The white officer smirked, a little too proud of himself. "Yeah, sure. We'll get right on that." He pulled open the door roughly, grabbing Elias's arm, and just like that, the cuffs clicked cold around his wrists. Elias didn't resist, didn't raise his voice, didn't even curse. He simply closed his eyes for a split second, and prepared himself for what he knew was about to come. But if they thought the story was over, they were about to find out how wrong they were. The cuffs dug into his wrists, tighter than necessary, as the two officers pushed him against the hood of his own SUV. His metals clinked lightly against the metal as he leaned forward, biting down frustration that threatened to bubble up. Behind them, a few people had gathered, curious faces peeking out from inside the cafe windows, others standing frozen by their cars, phones held low, but definitely recording. Elias kept his voice calm. "You're making a serious mistake, officers. My credentials are real. I suggest you call the number on the back of my ID immediately. The Pentagon can verify." "Save it," the white cop snapped, checking Elias's pockets roughly. "Anyone can print an ID these days." The Latino officer, standing a few steps away, looked a little less sure now. He stared at the name stitched on Elias's uniform, the ribbons lined perfectly across his chest, the combat infantry badge pinned with honor. But doubt wasn't enough to stop what was already rolling downhill. "We got a call. You fit the description," he said, almost like he was convincing himself. "We can sort it out down at the station." Elias closed his eyes again for a beat. There it was, the easy script they all used. Sort it out later, after the humiliation, after the damage. They hadn't asked any real questions, hadn't given him the basic courtesy a teenager would get for a broken taillight. They saw his skin first. Everything else came second. A small woman with a red baseball cap stepped closer from the cafe crowd, yelling out, "That's him! That's the one! Told you he didn't belong?" Elias turned his head slightly, locking eyes with her. She flinched, but kept her stance, arms folded like she'd just saved the town from some invisible threat. The white cop glanced at her, then back at Elias. His posture stiffened. He liked an audience. He yanked Elias toward the cruiser. "Officer," Elias said again, steady but louder this time, "I am a Major General in the United States Army. You are making a career-ending mistake." The white cop snorted. "Major General, huh? Next thing you'll tell us, you're best friends with the President." Elias shook his head slightly. "No, but the Secretary of Defense does have me on speed dial. You want to test it?" The Latino cop hesitated, looking between Elias and his partner. Maybe there was something in Elias's voice, the calm certainty, the way he didn't sound desperate, just sure, that chipped at his doubt. "Mike," he said under his breath, using the white cop's first name, "maybe we should call—" Mike cut him off with a glare. "No, we do this by the book." And by the book, he meant their book. Elias kept walking, let himself be guided to the back seat of the cruiser without resistance. He sat down, hands still cuffed behind him, metals still glinting in the sunlight. A full-grown man treated like he was nothing more than a petty thief. As the door slammed shut, Elias let out a slow breath. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was disappointed, in a way that carved deep, raw cuts inside him. And more than that, he was determined. He glanced through the wire mesh separating the back seat from the front. "Officers," he said clearly, "I suggest you use your radio right now, call your watch commander, then have him verify my identity through the Department of Defense." Mike smirked but said nothing. The Latino cop looked uncomfortable now, shifting in his seat. Elias's hands ached from the cuffs. His back was starting to cramp from the stiff seat. But he knew the real weight wasn't the metal around his wrists. It was the heavy truth pressing down on this moment. Even in full uniform, metals shining, he wasn't immune to suspicion. And somehow, in the twisted way America worked sometimes, that didn't even surprise him. But the clock was ticking, and what happened next would change everything for them. Not for him. The cruiser started rolling, slow at first, pulling out of Dale's coffee spot onto Main Street. People kept watching, some recording, some whispering behind their hands. Elias leaned his head back against the seat, watching the sky slice past the window. He wasn't thinking about the pain in his wrists or the knot forming in his shoulders. He was thinking about how quickly the country he fought for had turned its back on him, again. Up front, Mike chuckled to himself, tapping the steering wheel like this was just another routine stop. "What's the event, anyway?" he asked mockingly. "Comic-Con, costume party?" Elias didn't even blink. The Veterans Honor Ceremony, recognizing 20 soldiers who never made it home. The Latino officer, his name tag said Ramirez, shifted again, visibly uncomfortable now. He stared straight ahead, gripping the dashboard like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Mike just laughed under his breath. Yeah, okay, General. We'll see what the boss says back at the station. Elias gave a small smile, sharp as a blade. Oh, you'll see real fast. The station wasn't far, maybe 5 minutes, but every second felt thick, heavy. Ramirez finally cleared his throat. Hey, maybe we should, double check before we book him. Mike shot him a glare. We don't double check stolen valor cases. You know the rules. We catch them, bring them in, sort it out later. Elias spoke up, voice even. You're not catching anything today, officer. You're catching a lawsuit and a scandal you won't walk away from. Mike slammed the brakes a little harder than necessary at a red light. The car jolted. He twisted around to look at Elias through the mesh. You threatening me, big man? No, sir, Elias said. I'm promising you. The light turned green. The cruiser lurched forward. They pulled into the small, aging police station, the building half hidden behind a row of dying oak trees. A couple more squad cars were parked out front. An older officer leaned against the front desk inside, sipping coffee, bored out of his mind. When Mike and Ramirez hauled Elias out of the car, the older officer raised an eyebrow at the sight of a man in full military dress blues, cuffed and scowling. What's this? He asked lazily. Mike jerked his thumb at Elias. Stolen valor. Had half the town calling it in. The older officer looked Elias up and down. His eyes paused a little longer on the ribbons, the stars on his shoulders, the worn look of a man who had seen real battle, not just read about it in comic books. You sure? He asked, voice a little quieter. Positive, Mike said without hesitation. Elias decided that was enough. Desk sergeant, Elias said clearly, I am Major General Elias Nathaniel Braxton. Serial number 458-22-6819. Please contact the Department of Defense immediately. You are unlawfully detaining me. The whole room froze for half a second. Even Ramirez looked pale now. The desk sergeant slowly lowered his coffee cup. You got ID on you? Ramirez reached into the evidence bag and pulled out Elias's ID, handing it over. The sergeant squinted at it, then looked again, then back up at Elias's face. This looks real, he muttered. Elias held his gaze, never blinking. It is real. And unless you want your town on national news by lunchtime, I suggest you pick up that phone right now. The sergeant's hand hovered over the landline, hesitated, then finally, he picked it up. Mike looked like he wanted to argue, but for the first time, doubt crept into his eyes. The call went through. The sergeant gave Elias's full name and serial number over the line. He waited, listened, and then his face turned a shade lighter. He sat up straighter. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. Yes, sir. I understand. He hung up the phone slowly and looked at Mike like he'd just lit the building on fire. You need to uncuff him, now. Mike frowned. What? But, now. Ramirez didn't wait. He moved faster than Elias thought possible, unlocking the cuffs and stepping back like he might get struck by lightning. Elias flexed his wrists, the deep red marks clear against his dark skin. He straightened his jacket carefully, adjusted his medals. Then he turned to Mike, who was still frozen in place. I told you, Elias said, voice like steel. You just ended your own career. But Mike still didn't understand how deep the trouble was. Not yet. That lesson was coming, and it would hit like a freight train. The room was heavy. Nobody spoke. The desk sergeant just kept staring at Elias, almost like he was seeing a ghost. Mike's mouth was half open, but no words came out. Ramirez stood there, stiff, looking like he wanted to disappear into the cracked linoleum floor. Elias took a slow, deliberate breath. His voice, when he spoke again, was calm but so sharp it could have cut steel. I'd like to use your phone. The sergeant shoved the landline across the desk without a word. Elias picked it up, dialed a direct line he had memorized for emergencies. Not 911, not public relations. Straight to the Pentagon. It rang once, twice, then a clipped voice answered. This is Colonel Reeves. This is Major General Elias Braxton, he said simply. I've been unlawfully detained by local law enforcement in Rockford, Michigan. I need a verification broadcast immediately. There was a pause. Yes, sir. Stand by. The call lasted less than a minute, but when Elias hung up, the ripple started. Within 15 minutes, 2 black government Suburbans pulled into the parking lot outside, windows tinted so dark it was impossible to see inside. A few local officers peered through the blinds, whispering now, panic setting in. Out stepped a tall man in a dark blue suit, no nonsense in his face, a small earpiece tucked neatly into his ear. Two others flanked him, quiet, surveying everything. The tall man walked straight into the station, pulled a leather badge from his coat, and flashed it quickly at the desk sergeant. "Department of Defense," he said, voice low and deadly serious. "We're here for General Braxton." Ramirez stepped back automatically. Mike didn't move. His face was a sickly shade of gray now. The man in the suit turned his hard stare onto Mike. "Which one of you initiated the arrest?" Mike's mouth opened and closed like he couldn't quite find his voice. I did," he croaked. The man nodded once. "Good. You'll be speaking with Internal Affairs. Effective immediately. You are suspended without pay pending a federal investigation." Mike started to protest, but the words tangled in his throat. He looked over at Ramirez like he expected backup. Ramirez just stared at the floor, silent. The man turned to Elias, his entire tone shifting. "General Braxton, sir, we deeply regret this incident. We are ready to escort you to your destination and provide full assistance." Elias gave a small nod but said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence carried more weight than any speech ever could. The agents moved around him like a shield, guiding him calmly out of the station while the entire department watched. As they stepped into the cool air outside, the tall man leaned in slightly. "You should know, sir, the secretary is personally handling this. Press teams have been briefed. Statements are being prepared." Elias nodded again, climbing into the back seat of the waiting Suburban. The door closed with a heavy thunk. Inside the car, the agent handed him a bottle of water and a clean cloth for the red marks on his wrists. "Sir, we'll make sure the world knows exactly what happened here." Elias finally allowed himself a small, tired smile. "I'm not worried about me," he said. "I'm worried about the next man who doesn't have a direct line to the Pentagon, the man who doesn't wear stars on his shoulder." The agent nodded once, seriously. "Understood, sir." They pulled away from the police station slowly, leaving behind a building full of people who had just watched their world collapse in real time. But the worst for them wasn't the suspension, or even the shame. It was what was waiting just beyond the town lines, in the hands of the American public. It didn't take long. The moment the Pentagon issued their official statement, it was like lighting a match in a dry forest. By the time Elias was halfway to his veterans event, his phone, which the agents had returned to him, was blowing up with messages and calls. News outlets across the country ran the story within hours. Headlines plastered every screen. Major General wrongfully arrested while in full uniform. Racial profiling hits America's highest ranks. Pentagon responds swiftly to local police misconduct. Cable news anchors replayed the footage from the cafe parking lot over and over, the rough cuffs snapping over Elias's wrists, the stiff pride still standing in his posture, the disbelief in the faces of the bystanders. The image of a black general arrested while wearing his dress blues struck a nerve deep across the country. Twitter exploded. Veterans groups posted furious messages of support. Politicians scrambled to release statements of deep concern. Celebrities, activists, and ordinary citizens rallied around Elias's name, turning it into a symbol overnight. Hashtag I stand with General Braxton started trending worldwide. Meanwhile, the Rockford Police Department's phones never stopped ringing. Angry calls poured in from every corner of the country. Local officials scheduled emergency press conferences, fumbling to control the damage. But it was already too late. Officer Michael Granger, had his full disciplinary record dragged out into the sunlight. Old complaints surfaced. Previous allegations of misconduct that had been quietly buried now roared back with a vengeance. Video clips from previous traffic stops he conducted resurfaced, edited together by furious internet sleuths, showing a pattern of discrimination that painted a damning picture. Ramirez's silence didn't protect him either. Though he hadn't been the one leading the arrest, his failure to act landed him in the same boiling pot. Complicit. That was the word commentators used over and over. The Department of Justice got involved within days. A full-scale investigation was launched into the department's practices. Mike was officially fired within a week, stripped of his badge and pension. Ramirez was suspended indefinitely, facing charges of negligence and misconduct. Their names would never be separated from what they had done to Elias Braxton. At a packed press conference, the mayor of Rockford stood behind a flimsy podium, trying to sound sincere while reading a statement full of legal padding. "We apologize deeply to Major General Braxton and his family. We are committed to addressing the systemic issues that allowed this situation to occur." Elias watched the apology from his hotel room after the veterans event, sitting in a chair by the window, suit jacket unbuttoned, tie loosened. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel vindicated. He felt tired. A different kind of tired. The kind that settled in your bones and stayed there. A young reporter stood outside Dale's coffee spot that evening, microphone in hand, narrating the scene where it had all started. "This incident reminds us," she said seriously, "that no uniform, no title, and no amount of service can shield you from the realities of discrimination. But it also reminds us of the power of exposure and the consequences of unchecked bias." Elias turned off the TV, sat in silence. He thought of all the men and women who wore the same uniform, who fought and died believing in a country that still couldn't always see their full humanity. He thought of the kids growing up right now, watching all this unfold, wondering if their skin color would one day weigh heavier than their achievements. But he knew his story wasn't just about him anymore. It was bigger. It was about every silent battle fought off the battlefield, every quiet injustice that needed a voice. The next morning, the sun rose over Rockford, but the weight in the air hadn't lifted. At Dale's coffee spot, the windows stayed dark. The parking lot was empty. The small town that had once prided itself on being all-American was now the center of a painful national conversation. Elias sat on the edge of his hotel bed, uniform jacket draped neatly over the chair. His wrists were still sore, but it wasn't the physical pain that kept him awake. It was the knowledge that this wasn't new. This had happened before. To others, without cameras, without badges, without backup. It would happen again. But something was different now. This time, people saw it. This time, nobody could say it didn't exist. There was a knock at his door. One of the Pentagon agents, Agent Carter, stood there with a quiet nod. "Sir, media's requesting a statement. Would you like to prepare one?" Elias thought for a second, then shook his head. No speeches. Just the truth." He followed Carter down to a small conference room in the hotel, where a wall of reporters waited, microphones and cameras aimed like weapons. He stood there, tall, proud, worn but not broken. When they asked him how he felt, he answered without hesitation. "I'm not here to speak for myself. I'm here for every black soldier, every black citizen who's ever been seen as a threat first and a person second. Wearing a uniform didn't shield me. Wearing medals didn't protect me, and if it can happen to a major general, what happens to the kid walking home from school?" The room fell silent. Reporters scribbled notes frantically, but nobody interrupted. Elias took a breath, steady and sure. This isn't just a bad cop problem, it's a mirror, and if we don't like what we see, we need to fix the reflection, not smash the mirror. He paused, letting it hang there, letting it sink deep. "I love my country. I fought for it. I would do it again tomorrow. But loving something means holding it accountable, pushing it to be better, stronger, fairer." Another reporter raised a hand. "General Braxton, what do you hope happens next?" Elias looked straight into the camera. "I hope we stop pretending. I hope we start listening. I hope we remember that respect isn't something you put on like a uniform. It's something you owe to every human being you meet." He stepped back then, leaving the microphones behind, walking out into the cool morning air. Not because he was done speaking, but because he had already said everything that mattered. Later that week, the footage from the cafe lot would be replayed not just as a moment of injustice, but as a moment of clarity. Schools would show it during history lessons. Military academies would discuss it during ethics training. Families would talk about it around dinner tables. It became more than just a mistake. It became a lesson, a warning, and a spark. Elias Braxton didn't ask for that moment. He didn't want it, but he carried it the same way he had carried his rifle, his gear, his country. With dignity, with grit, with the quiet power of a man who refuses to be erased. And to you watching this right now, ask yourself, are you part of the problem or are you part of the change? Because silence is a choice. And in moments like these, the world doesn't need more silence. It needs more courage.